So welcome to Earth Station Trek, a show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Charles Kelso, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew: Keith Johnson.
Greetings, carbon-based units.
Alan Seiler.
What's up, Twitch?
And Veronica Dashel.
Sorry, I'm watching myself on the Twitch and seeing how long the delayed reaction is.
This is not going to work.
We're going off the rails already.
We've lost Veronica already. We're a man down. Yes, this is exciting. We're taking part of the Strange New Pod is hosting the Captain Picard Week Podcast Festival, and we jumped on that, and we are doing a segment tonight about Captain Picard's legacy on film, and it's going to be specifically about Picard as a film character, which is pretty distinct, I think, from Captain Picard as he was portrayed on television. And I was just telling the guys, because we're starting off with Generations, and I was very surprised when I was about 20, I got into Star Trek Online fandom and things. And before that, growing up, I was the only person I knew in the suburbs north of Atlanta who liked Star Trek. And it was just my thing. And so it was really exciting for me when I was 13 to go see Generations, because to me, it was as epic as something like, Avengers Endgame would be now. It was Captain Picard and Captain Kirk on screen. But then just to be in a room full of people for the first time who were into Star Trek. And as the movie was starting, they were having problems with the projector. And then I remember there was some guy in the crowd yelled out, "I can't do it, Captain. I don't have the power." And then some other guy chimed in, "Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a projectionist."
That is amazing.
I'm among Star Trek fans. This is amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's kick it off with Generations. This is a film that I loved and I had no problems with whatsoever, and didn't realize that other people didn't like for many years of my life. And so I'm wondering what you guys think of Generations as a film, but specifically what they did with Captain Picard in that film.
Other people always ruin stuff.
If only they all liked what I like.
Exactly. General impressions. I enjoyed it a lot the first time I saw it, and I saw it in the theater too, like opening day or opening weekend at least, because I was super jazzed about this. And I remember it was like, this isn't specifically about Picard, but I remember how different it looked, like it didn't look like it's so easy to, like, you don't see this with the original series movies, but it looked like, if you take this episode and put it on the screen, it would look, I don't even know what the hell I'm trying to say. But this looked bigger. It looked like the use of lighting was different. Oh yeah. It looked exactly the same, but richer. You know what I mean? Like everything was filmed in a different way. And I thought it really sort of transformed those sets, and the characters were just like came alive in a different way.
Yeah. Keith?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. And I thought it was interesting, Chuck, when you were saying about going back down memory lane. I thought it was so funny when you were saying that, I guess, growing up north of Atlanta, you didn't know any Star Trek, a lot of Star Trek friends. To me, that is so wild, because I didn't know anybody pretty much who didn't like Star Trek. I mean, I knew a lot of people who didn't like Star Trek, but I grew up in a time when there was a lot of Star Trek fans around me.
Right.
I grew up in the original series. And so I remember, for example, when I went to college and started traveling for business and stuff, I would always do three things when I go to a new city. I'd look for a comic book store in the city. I'd look for a local diner, because I love local flavor. And I'd pull out the TV guide and see where the original series was showing. Because there was a time where it showed all the time, and you could find it in like any city in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been a lifelong fan of Star Trek since I was about 6 or 7 years old. Started with the original series. And then I clearly remember the excitement of seeing the Next Generation with Picard on the small screen. And I remember at the time it was funny, because for a whole bunch of reasons, things that happened, and I ended up renting a TV for it, or renting a color TV from one of those rental center kind of places. And I got this TV that had cigarette burns in it. And then I had this whole thing of somebody trying to repossess it. So let's just say I've been a Star Trek fan. So if I was excited enough to rent a television and watch the series on premiere on television, then I also remember being excited to go to see it at the movie. And I think, as y'all said, one thing I noticed is that the cinematography was different for the movies. And I think we talk about a lot of times with television shows. I remember even series like the TV series Highlander, that on the big screen, this is the one with Duncan MacLeod, Adrian Paul, looks so much different on the big screen than the small screen. And you're right, I could see there were all these touches. There were a lot more views of the Enterprise, for example. Yeah, not the long, slow pan of the original movie, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Right. But there were a lot more shots of the Enterprise. They were really trying to give you a feeling of the scope and the scale of the ship. And I like that. The music is bigger. The action is bigger. So I liked it. There's a lot about the first movie. I gotta say, in some ways I was a little disappointed in the first movie with Generations, but there was so much about it I like, and I did like the look of it on the big screen.
Now, Veronica, I feel like you would have seen this movie like 6 months ago for the first time or something.
No, I had seen it before I met you at some point. Probably because it was on TV, and I was just thinking, like, for me, I probably saw it on TV for the first time, and I probably did not realize it was any different than the episodes, because I remember you guys, I mean, just now you guys were talking about how the scope was so different, and I'm here thinking, I forgot that when he got his memory chip, that wasn't an episode, not the memory chip, the emotional chip.
Yeah.
I was thinking, and I was just watching it again today, and I was like, oh, that's right, this is part of the movie, not an episode.
Right.
Wow.
So for me, I didn't notice that. I'm even today watching it and like trying to think about stuff. It seemed like an episode to me.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it does feel though more like an episode than the other movies do.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. It looks different, but as far as like the story that's being told, it could have been a television story.
Yeah, just a bigger one than you would normally get.
Right.
But even Picard was a lot more Picard-like, or more series Picard-like than he was in some of the later films. And now, if you're watching along and you have comments, feel free to throw them out. Veronica's going to be interrupting us as we get comments, and you get to hear Veronica read out your comment. That's part of the fun. So don't be shy. If you're
I'm going to stumble over the comments. So if you read things, then you can laugh at me as I attempt to read them clearly.
Put complicated words in and lots of Trek no babble and
as big of words as possible.
It'll be entertaining.
But yeah, I mean, I guess there's an expectation with a film that the characters are going to have bigger emotional beats than they will in a TV show for an average episode.
Well, Data had bigger emotional beats.
He did, but Picard did too. Yeah, but I mean, with Picard, they had the subplot of Picard's nephew and brother dying in a fire.
Right.
And he's dealing with that, the loss, but also the loss to him and sort of regret in his life of not, having children. And and really they try to tie that in with Soren's story. So what does anyone have any thoughts about? I mean, how well did that work?
Well, there's a couple of things when we're talking about the film series specifically. First is that when you're doing a television series, once or twice per season, you're going to get a Troy episode, and you're going to get a Beverly episode, and you're going to get a LaForge episode, and you don't get any of that in the movies. But at the same time, with it being, 90 minutes to 2 hours or whatever it is, instead of a 45-minute episode, you have time to really go into these emotional places in the characters that you're writing for, in a way that we did get a whole episode of like family, after the Borg issue, after the, and so you have that I was surprised actually that they spent an entire episode on Picard's emotional impact from being turned into Locutus. But here is a story that they spend that time to really sort of like develop the emotional impact.
Like there was all these comments coming through and the phone never loaded. And the first thing I saw was something phone screwed up. And I was like, oh, this phone screwed up too. So sorry, guys.
It's okay. I wasn't saying anything important or meaningful. I'm kidding.
Galaxy Star Queen says their favorite Star Trek Picard was the Christmas scene in the Nexus.
Yeah.
And I also forgot that the Christmas scene was part of the movie, and I thought it was an episode as I'm reading this. Guinan. Yeah. Look, I can pronounce it though.
Well done.
Yeah.
Oh, and Spotted Giraffe says that the Christmas scene always cracked them up because they are supposedly French. So Christmas is that a thing that French don't celebrate Christmas? Like,
I don't know. I feel like I feel like his Christmas looked very British, but
it did.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
agree.
Yeah, it looked more like a Charles Dickens thing than
yeah,
Yes.
but
something else.
Picard's French.
Well,
basically.
Well, doesn't it go back to didn't Gene Roddenberry actually want a Frenchman originally for Picard, and that's why the name stuck?
Spotted Giraffe is French.
Yes, Spotted Giraffe is French.
Yeah,
I did not know that. Yay! Look, I learned something.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alan.
I was I had wrapped up what I was saying when she interrupted me so rudely.
Well, I instructed her
teasing.
too.
I'm totally teasing.
Okay. Good.
Well, one thing you said, Charles, I found very interesting is you mentioned the TNG episode Family, which is one of my favorite episodes of all Star Trek. I love that episode specifically because they did something that they'd never done before with Kirk, which was they let the emotional pain that a character had endured last into another show, and they showed that. And looking at the movies, I was thinking about the original series movies with Shatner as the lead and the TNG movies with Picard, and you look at, they're not just a change of characters, but they're a change of times, because as you look at Kirk was the redoubtable captain who, he was hurt a lot. Look at the thing with Edith Keeler and look at the thing with Miramani on the planet where he lost his memory. But the next episode, he was back to being Kirk again. And that's a generational change, because you had a completely different group of people running Star Trek. But a lot of the things I noticed about the movies is, even though they're action-packed, there's a lot more of vulnerability that Jean-Luc shows in all the movies versus what Shatner shows.
Right.
And there's a lot more of a meditation, even with Kirk, who was regretting the whole thing with losing his son David and the life he could have had. Even then, at the end, he still turned his eyes to the stars. And even though Picard did the same thing, you felt a little bit more regret. And I would also think, if you look at the arc in the movies with Picard, he also took, in a lot of ways, a lot more emotional blows all the way than Shatner did. Ultimately, Shatner lost his son, and he lost Spock temporarily. Picard lost his, in the Enterprise. Picard lost an Enterprise, and he lost his family, and he lost Data. And he had to deal with that weird thing we'll get to later with Shinzon, this twisted mirror of himself. And he also dealt with the whole thing with Starfleet like Kirk did. And it seemed like in a lot of ways, there was a lot more introspection and vulnerability with Picard than in the times of Kirk. And I actually liked that change. I like that. I like to see it just a little bit more of, you keep going, but there are prices that you pay for that. And I think the movie showed a little bit more of the prices that Picard paid to be a captain in Starfleet.
Right.
And I saw you giggling, Veronica. Did you have something to add?
No, I'm giggling about how I'm going to get super distracted. And I commented on that in the Twitch post, which none of y'all are seeing. So
okay. she's laughing at her own comments.
Thanks for sharing verbally.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I like that. I mean, I think as an interesting dimension to Picard to find out in Generations that he regrets not having a family. He sort of thought he's very proud of his family line, but he thought he was off the hook because his brother had a son. It's not my responsibility.
Yeah.
It's
such an interesting layer, in the kind of franchise that we're talking about. It's a really interesting layer to get, especially when you're going into a movie and you do need to be more action packed and to do a bigger story. It's interesting that they do bigger in the sense of the scope of the story that they're able to tell, but they're also doing bigger in the sense of what they can reveal about their central character.
Right.
And I find that to be like the most successful thing about the TNG movies.
Yeah. And well, if you have Patrick Stewart starring in your film, you got to give him something to act,
Right.
Give him some meat to chew on.
Absolutely. It would be such a shame to have an actor of that caliber and to not give him that kind of weighty material to work with.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways, the movies continued the arc of the character himself from the series. I remember, I remember when in All Good Things, when Picard finally joined the poker game. And this is after 7 years of really learning to open himself up more to his crew. And I never forget, he said, I should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it was like, even being part of the poker game, was almost a vulnerability that he didn't want to show. I'm the captain, and then there's the rest of the people. Mm-hmm. And when the movies come, he's opened up even more of himself. He's more of a friend to his people than he is a commanding officer. So I agree, Alan. I think that the way the movies were able to integrate showing more emotional beats with Picard as well as the action was pretty good. And I love Captain Kirk. He was my first captain, but in a lot of ways, with the changes with the new generations of Picard and Cisco and so forth, I do like more the captains who still show that they're human beings. They're not superhumans.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you brought up All Good Things, because as a it's not really a two-parter. It was like a 2-hour finale. So without commercials, it boils down to 95 minutes or whatever. And to me, the story was a bigger scale than what TNG normally did. And so I really see that as the transition point between, it's like it's pivoting from episodic television onto big screen, epic adventure. And I really see that as an important step in what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. I think that last episode develops not only Picard, but it also transitions the way the show is done to what it's going to be when it becomes big screen. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because man, I love that episode for one thing. But
and they had a very short break between
exactly
All Good Things and Generations.
Right. And that's why I think it comes across as so pivotal, so transitional, because there was that really short window, and it's like no time passed. It's like they stepped from one onto the other with no break, and you just flow right along with it.
Yeah.
And there's go ahead, Charles.
No, go ahead.
The pivotal thing in Generations, and I think we all mentioned the loss of the Enterprise. Jumping on what you said, Alan, also about the progress. I think that the Picard from season 1 would not have reacted to the destruction of the Enterprise the same way the Picard of season 7 in the movie did, because at the end, in some ways, Riker was more gutted by the loss of the Enterprise than Picard. Not that he wasn't gutted by the loss of his ship, but I love the optimism that he had, because he was basically, we will rebuild, we will go on. And that again is a little different Picard than the really stoic, almost butthole guy in the first episode. When Riker came on, he wasn't very friendly to him. But I love that progress.
And Spotted Giraffe says All Good Things is definitely a TNG movie by itself.
Oh yeah,
exactly right.
I've said that on our show before, that a lot of the 2-hour Star Trek episodes they did are better than the movies they did.
Agreed.
But I mean, I guess, if you're losing your ship, it sort of puts it in perspective if your family died 3 days ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's already dealt with a much larger grief and loss than the loss of a ship, this week, you know, but it's sort of the theme of the film for Picard of, making peace with what you've lost and the decisions you've made in your life and moving on. You don't want to turn into a Soren and chase that the rest of your life.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, Soren let it consume him. And that's, I guess that's the juxtaposition they're making in the film, is that, Picard could have been consumed by that, but he chose to move past that instead and keep going forward. I mean, he could have stayed in the Nexus and pretended to have a family forever.
Exactly.
Right. And season 1 Picard probably wouldn't have reacted quite like that. So I do like the progress of the character. And
he would have hated all those children being everywhere.
Absolutely.
Number 1.
And what I also think is, I would also like is, having seen many interviews with Patrick Stewart, Patrick Stewart will tell you straight up himself that he himself changed while filming Star Trek. As he came in, he himself said he was standoffish from the rest of the crew. He was a theater actor. He didn't know if he was going to last on the show. I remember listening to one interview with Patrick Stewart where he said that Frakes and company, they were always cracking jokes and stuff between takes, and he was kind of like, wait, what's the deal here? You're supposed to be serious. And then by the end, and now if you look at the guy, you almost can't even see that the same person. He is such a fun-loving person, and he has often said that show and those people helped him kind of unwind as an actor. It's so funny. And then the arc of Picard kind of follows that as well. So I've always liked that. So
well, let's pivot and talk about First Contact then. To me, First Contact really rebooted the visual Star Trek universe.
100%.
And something, a point that I've made before on this show is that, I mean, if if there had been no Star Trek after Generations, and then they brought it back as First Contact like last year, the internet would have gone crazy crying over it because it's so different. All of a sudden, the next gen characters are all wearing gray and they're in a battleship, and you know what I mean. Like Picard is swinging from ropes and punching Borg, and you know what I mean. Like you don't even know this show.
Tommy guns, don't forget Tommy guns.
If Kirkman had done First Contact, they'd be crucifying him over it. But it really did reinvent Picard in a very different way. I mean, he was in a fist fight in Generations, but it didn't go very well. Captain Kirk had to take care of that element.
Yeah.
But he was much more a man of action in First Contact.
Absolutely.
Did y'all like that shift? Because based on what commenting on what you're saying, Chuck, I know a lot of people felt that the shift to such an action hero Picard almost felt too abrupt for some people.
For me, I was 15 at the time, and my brother took me to see it. And I loved it. You know, I thought it was super cool. I thought the Enterprise E was super cool. You know, I thought the uniforms were super. Basically, everything was just super cool about that movie.
Okay, we got the tagline for the entire night.
Super cool.
For some reason, I want to go jazz hands, but yeah, I could see that.
It was super cool, but they did things.
Fingers.
They did things with that movie that they had never done before, you know, like, and not just with the characters, but with the way that the story is told, like all the climbing around on the hull of the ship, you know, was so amazing to see at that time because we'd never seen anything like it. And I bet there's a comment.
Okay. So J Crabsap, which took me a second to figure out what the name was. I apologize if I also slaughtered that. Said all good things is better than Generations. And Spotted Giraffe says
I agree.
They should have done a Starship Mine Die Hard movie.
Yeah. I mean,
that would have been hilarious.
It basically was. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go down this tangent, but I mean, Yesterday's Enterprise would have been a great movie.
There's a number of episodes that would have been much better as a movie.
Yeah, but if we start naming those, we're not going to make it
exactly
to the actual movie. So this podcast will turn into the movies they should have done.
Well, stay tuned for that topic on our regular podcast. Coming soon.
Right.
And you never know when.
I know when I first saw it, I also had wondered initially was Picard a little over the top with the anger and the emotion he showed, and
everyone was.
Yeah. And I think in some ways he was, but I guess at the same time, if you think about what he'd been through with the Borg,
right? Exactly.
That explains that. And another thing, I keep contrasting with Captain Kirk and the different time periods. One of the things that always struck me when I first watched TNG is Picard is the first captain, the main captain, to get broken in the series. Kirk never was broken, not truly broken. The closest he came was in Dagger of the Mind, when Dr. Adams put him in that crazy chair and was draining his mind. But if you think about it in TNG, Picard was actually broken twice. The whole thing with the 4 lights and the 5 lights, because while at the last second he managed not to say it, he had been changed because he saw the number of lights the guy told him. So, and I remember watching it and going, wow, a starship captain, Kirk was never truly broken. Picard was actually broken. That was a subtle but a bold move. And then the Borg broke him, because I didn't notice until years later when Patrick Stewart said it and I heard it, but I didn't realize in The Best of Both Worlds that when the Borg were changing him, he was crying. And there's a small tear that comes down. So then looking at the movie again, I was thinking, well, that's the first. Now, if we look at all the other captains, like Captain Tracy and stuff, we had 1 million captains who were broken, but the Star captain was never broken. Picard. And so then looking at it, I could look at him wielding a Tommy gun and as Lily said, killing his own crew members with almost no remorse. I can kind of forgive it more, given that he was truly broken by the Borg, and 11,000 people died under his command. As
it's not
I'm skipping a lot of comments because they're not making things. They're coming in after we've moved on because apparently the phone hates me. But Spotted Giraffe says Kirk wasn't broken, but he got relieved of command and put on trial.
True.
Hold on. I'm
for court martial.
12,749,174 times in 3 seasons. That's exactly the number.
Okay.
That's why it took me a minute to figure out what the number was. I had to put the commas in there.
Okay.
Mentally insert the comments.
Yes.
Okay, so to what Keith was just saying, what was Keith just saying?
Picard broken.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's not just about Picard being broken. Picard was fully 100% assimilated.
Yeah.
No one in
Yes.
Starfleet understood what the Borg are like he did. He had that
Yes.
knowledge of what they are, what they do, what
Yes.
they're about, and
Right.
how dangerous they absolutely can be. So with no one else having that sort of internal knowledge of it, of
Great
course
point.
he's going to go on that rampage, because he knows whatever they did to him, they could do to the entire Federation, to the entire quadrant.
So what you're saying then, when Lily attacked, that's a very good point. So when Lily was saying how he was killing his people who had been infected with the nanites,
Yeah.
and she said, "You show no remorse." He was literally doing that. This is a faith worse than death. So I'm literally going to I know what they're going to become.
Yeah.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because in Home, one of the best scenes in all of Star Trek is when he was crying and he said, "I tried to fight them. Remember when he broke down and he cried and he said, I couldn't stop them." So he was aware the whole time what they made him do. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
very, very good point.
Oh,
They sort of ramped everyone's emotions up to 11 in that episode, in that movie.
Right.
yeah.
But I think they did a good job of creating a situation for that, where they were facing the Borg, they were cornered, they were losing. But I mean, if you try to imagine Worf standing on the Enterprise D bridge on the show and saying to Picard, "If you were any other man, I would kill you where you stand."
Yeah, that
you know
was
what I mean? Like,
Oh my God, that's one of my favorite Worf moments in the history of the show.
yeah, but I think it works in the film.
Absolutely.
Just like, his big, the line must be drawn here.
Yes.
Oh,
No
great
further.
line. Great
I will
line.
make them pay.
Yeah. He was channeling his Shakespearean actor at that
Oh,
point.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. That was like the St. Christmas Day speech or something he was giving.
But he was very much more a man of action in that movie than he.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he has moments in the show, like with Starship Mine, but
Yes.
Mhm.
but not to the extent that he's, wearing a tank top and, and swinging
Right.
like Tarzan. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And impressing guys 20 years younger with the muscles that the man was showing. Yeah. He was, I agree. It was a little over the top, but I think, as you said, Patrick Stewart doing it, nobody could do it as well.
Mhm.
And I do like, again, when it's all said and done, he was Jean-Luc. Yeah, he was thoughtful and he was introspective, especially having talked to Lily and what he had been through. And also he had seen a part of himself that scared him, I think.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And on that note, before we transition to the next film, I just want to say it is a damn shame that we never got any DS9 movies, because I would love to have seen what would happen with Avery Brooks
Oh my gosh,
on the big
Cisco.
screen, and how Cisco could have been like expanded, and what an opportunity that would have been.
That's another rabbit hole we need to go down on.
Exactly.
Time.
Exactly right.
Yeah, because I'll lose the next half hour talking about that.
Right on.
So
on.
Spotted Giraffe is calling for a DS9 movie and a Voyager movie.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll
go for it.
Create the petition. I'll sign it.
Yep.
There you go.
So overall, that y'all
Got my
like
pen right here.
does like most fans, does First Contact become your favorite of all the next TNG movies? Is that
Yes.
kind of like, that's the factor for
Yes.
everybody?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without
Yeah.
a doubt.
I mean, the Borg were the perfect villain, because for one,
Correct.
Picard has that emotional connection to them,
Right.
more so even than Kirk does with Khan. I mean, to be honest with you.
Oh,
But,
totally.
But also,
Yeah.
they make such a great movie villain because they're an army of sci-fi zombies. you
Right.
know?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
they're perfect, but also they tied it in beautifully with sort of Star Trek lore by bringing in Zefram Cochrane and bringing in the first contact with the Vulcans at the end. So you have that real sort of uplifting Star Trek ending for the film.
Yep.
After you spend all this
Yes.
time, shooting zombies and basically having a zombie movie in space, but then at the end you're like, yeah, this is the beginning of our future. This is the start of Star Trek.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's a densely packed movie too. So much stuff going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, hey, that makes more sense of why there were space zombies in an early episode of Lower Decks, because
Yeah,
The
those were
Borg.
just zombies though.
Yeah, but it was still space zombies.
That's true. They were in space. You're right about that.
So Jake Crabsap says maybe we can get a Kelvin DS9.
Oh, I don't know.
That's interesting.
We're like Avery Brooks. What?
We're all casting in our head.
Exactly. Immediately, like, and it starts at the top. What would you even possibly do with Cisco?
Spotted Giraffe says no.
Yeah, thanks for the comment, but inside joke, you notice I got real quiet at that point, so I'll just leave it there.
So I nominate Keith to be the on-screen Cisco.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
You got to grow the goatee though.
Yeah.
I can play Dax, right?
Jadzia.
Sure. Dax.
Yeah, I was gonna say which one.
All of them. Anyway, tangent.
All right. Yeah. Well, I guess that brings us to
Idris Elba.
Idris. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Spotted Giraffe.
Yeah, I could go Idris Elba.
And so would J Crabsap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll go with that.
There you
Cisco.
go.
Sure.
There we go.
Oh,
We've got to go.
the idea of me.
Cast.
I was getting used to the idea of me playing it, but if you want to do Idris, okay.
What's Idris got that I ain't got?
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Okay. So yeah, that's all the next gen movies. I guess we can.
I mean, I think you could spend the whole episode on those two and not feel like you've lost anything.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Insurrection came along at time. I guess. And now I'm just telling the story of my watching all these movies for the first time. But I was 17.
Okay.
And I don't know. I'd gotten to an age. I mean, when I was young and I watched, when I was 10 years old and watched Star Trek 5, I didn't know or care that it was bad. I just loved it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But by the time you're 17, you notice when they put out something really bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we went to see Insurrection. My mother and I went to see it. And I remember the first thing she said to me when we sat down, and she's like, "Why didn't you come see this with a girl?" So I'm already having a bad time there. I thought it was nice hanging out with my mom, but
oh my gosh.
But
that's
yeah,
amazing.
I remember reading about Insurrection before it came out, and they were comparing it to like Heart of Darkness and really building up that element of it. And I just I could not.
Heart of Darkness?
Yeah, the original pitch for Insurrection was going to be a Star Trek Heart of Darkness.
Wow.
Picard having to hunt down an old friend of his, which later became Data, which later became Data. If you've never read the book Fade In by Michael Piller, which is available legitimately sort of as a textbook, it's like $65 or $70. You can get it through his wife. It's also, if you have Google, you can locate it as well. But it was leaked at one point. But it's a book that Michael Piller wrote about his experiences writing the film Insurrection, and it's the most honest accounts of writing a film I've ever read, and it's really illuminating about what went into making that. It's honest enough that he couldn't publish it.
Okay, so one, what is Heart of Darkness?
Okay, I'm sorry.
And two, Spotted Giraffe was apparently surprised because she says, "Wait, what's Insurrection and Heart of Darkness? What happened?"
Yeah, Heart of Darkness was a story by Joseph Campbell, and it was also the inspiration for the film Apocalypse Now. So if you've seen Apocalypse Now, that's sort of the gist. But essentially, it would be it would be Picard having to hunt down an old friend of his, who I think was named Duffy, who he'd gone to the academy with, and Duffy's gone rogue on this planet, and Picard's job is to hunt down his old friend. And then as the script permutated, they wanted to get Data in it more, so they had the idea to make Data in the Duffy role. So he's having to hunt Data down on this planet, and it's Data who is defending these locals, and it's really Picard versus Data for real.
Interesting.
Which of course gets watered down again to its Data is malfunctioning, and they have to sing Gilbert and Sullivan. You know what I mean? It's sort of, this is the progress of this film, where it from inspired by a great work.
I have no memory of this film.
Okay, that's I envy you. But in my opinion, I know people may love Insurrection. Maybe everyone is going to write me hate mail now, but I feel like the film's descended into, it's just too many opinions and too many playing it safe choices. And I feel like the villains didn't work, and the setting didn't work, and the comedy didn't work. And it was the first time Star Trek had gone all CGI with the spaceships, and I feel like in a lot of cases that didn't work. And it was the first time for me that I watched Star Trek and thought, this is really bad.
I just didn't think it was that bad. I mean, it wasn't great. It wasn't great. It wasn't my favorite, but I didn't think it was that bad. And I thought some of the humor worked well.
Okay.
Some, maybe.
To follow dovetail on what Alan said, I think for me, I would have to just go with the cliche opinion that you always hear, which is it felt like an episode of TNG, not a movie. And in that light, it wasn't awful. But if it had been if it had been like a two-parter on television, would have been fine. It wasn't a great movie, but I don't think it was an awful movie either. But it felt like a decent episode that was stretched to the big screen.
Well, I think its big downfall is that it happened to come after a movie that was a phenomenal Star Trek movie, which did things with the characters that it would never have been able to do on television. And after that, it just didn't stack up.
You know, one of the notes I made when I was looking at the whole Picard oeuvre and all the kind of stuff in the movies was, if you look at the original series movies, you've got the great trilogy: the Search for the Wrath of Khan, the Search for Spock, and the Voyage Home. And so with Wrath of Khan, you got the action movie, the Search for Spock, which is actually my favorite of the original series movies. You've got the deep drama, and then with the Voyage Home, you've got the lighthearted fun and adventure and comedy. And they didn't do that with the TNG movies, not really. And I sometimes wonder if they would have done better if they had, as you were just saying, Alan, they had to follow First Contact. I wonder if they had recreated the trilogy format of a really great action movie, and then a more sober movie, and then something more of a comedy, or if that would have been too much. But I think the reason that those three of the original series worked so well for so many different people is you had these different moods, and there's something for everyone in those. But this one, First Contact, was a lot of action and deep. This was attempting to be more action and was trying to say something very deep, because you're talking about, again, a potential strain of the fabric of what Federation and Starfleet itself is, but it didn't work quite well. And then they go on to Nemesis, which we'll get to, which is a really dark movie as well. So it's almost like they went a little too serious and dark for all three movies, and this one just didn't work as well.
But I think the other problem is that Insurrection was trying to hang its hat on something that the audience didn't care about. You've got this threat, and this whole scenario is built around these people we'd never heard of before. That it wasn't anything that drew the audience in. You didn't really make that connection of like some kind of like emotional contact between the characters and the threat like we had in the previous movie. So I just don't think that it was just too far removed from what it could have been.
Yeah, I think that they deliberately, I know for a fact they deliberately lightened it up. Yeah, because Patrick Stewart in particular thought that after First Contact they should do a lighter film. Yeah, and that sort of began the process of lightening it up. But it had some of the same problems that Star Trek V did, where you're putting in War for the Pimple as a comedy beat. You're putting in Data making, not understanding what boobs are for some reason. You know what I mean?
The jokes didn't land well. It was a bad mix.
Yeah, but as far as Picard goes, I really did like his relationship with Anij. I thought that that was one of the better relationships that Picard had on screen.
I agree with that.
I like, although I don't care much for the situation, I like the fact that Picard came to a point where it's my principles are the Federation. You know what I mean? The Federation is failing its principles. And that's something they revisit later in Picard.
And I was just going to say that too, that's an absolutely excellent precursor to what we saw in Picard season 1. I think when you take all that stuff in a spectrum, it makes a good and necessary step toward what we saw later on.
Yeah. And I think so too. And I think that, Picard making that step to stand up against the Federation, it says a lot about him and about who he is at that point as far as his principles. He's not, I don't know that season 1 Picard would have stood up against the Federation like that. You know what I mean? No. But by Insurrection, he does. And I think it's telling too that his crew, of course his crew is going to do it with him, but I like that his crew does it with him.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a good point that if you look at these things as arcs, overall growth across the years, then even the pieces that don't work well, when you look at them in the whole, they work well, because again, comparing him to Kirk, Kirk's movies were detailing a man toward the end of his career. I mean, even though he was reduced from admiralty captain and went back to becoming a captain, that was the end of Kirk's career. That was him winding down. And with Picard and TNG, he's not winding down his career at all. He's still going. And so one thing I do like about Insurrection is he's trying to find meaning in his career, trying to make sure that the entity of which he is a part and for which he is fighting is one that is worth being a part of. And that fuels him to continue. And then we find out, as you say, with the series Picard, we find out that much later he decides this is not an entity of which I want to be a part. And now, of course, he's trying to find himself again. So I like the fact that with Picard, the adventure continues, I guess you can say. And so seeing Insurrection as part of that continual journey, I think makes it maybe if not a better movie, a better piece.
Yeah, it not necessarily a better movie because even though looking back on it now, it's like a cog that fits in the machine.
Right.
It serves its purpose and it takes a step toward what we now know happens in that with that character. But at the time, you're only getting a movie every 2 years, 2.5 years, or whatever it is, and it has to stand on its own at the time that it premieres. And I just don't think it did. I don't think it did very well.
No.
One quick aside, Charles, you mentioned Anish. What did y'all think about her? Because she comes up on a lot of people's list as actually one of Picard's favorite partner, up there with Crusher and others. And I even read a wild theory online today that somebody had posted something that was basically saying that Picard had a child. You know, it was like, was he like Kirk, where he had a child he didn't know about or whatever? And someone said, well, maybe he and Anish had a child that we don't know about. I've never seen that before.
Hey, it was the Garden of Youth planet, you know, or Fountain of Youth planet. You know, no telling what's going on.
Yeah.
But I like Anish. I like that she had a maturity and wisdom to her. She seemed like above Picard's level, if anything, you know. Which is it's hard to do with an actor of that stature and a character of that stature of introducing someone who feels like they fit. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And when we did our Valentine's Day episode and we did our poll of the greatest relationships in Star Trek, I wish we had thought of her. It didn't even occur to me. I didn't even think of it.
Yeah.
But I rarely ever think of Insurrection. So
well, then let's move on from Insurrection and talk about Star Trek Nemesis.
Excellent.
You think so? Go ahead then.
Oh, I didn't mean the movie was excellent. I just mean moving away from Insurrection was excellent.
Like, in that case, you go first.
Okay, so Spotted Giraffe is apparently very excited about Nemesis.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Oh, good.
I can't tell if it's because they like it or because they can throw so much shade. I'm not sure yet. Because
we'll find out.
Shade earlier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Picard by this time is driving a dune buggy. You know,
and laughing.
Yeah. Anybody?
Well, I think
it's the darkest of all the movies, even much more, definitely much more than First Contact. It's got it's got an unfortunate scene with Troy that I don't like. But it's a very dark movie, and it's like Shinzon was Picard looking into this weird, fun mirror twisted version of himself and what he could become, and it's very bleak. I enjoyed it, but I can't really say I loved it or liked it, if that makes any sense. It's not a movie I go back to a lot.
Okay, I'm gonna try and do a small summary to make sure that I'm remembering it. Someone got Picard's DNA and made a clone of him, and that's who Shinzon is, right?
Right.
Okay, look at me remembering something.
And then we find out for the first time, Veronica, the whole in-depth thing about the Remans on the sister planet, and that they're basically slaves, and Shinzon was a slave, and he is
and they've built
of bitterness,
a giant evil ship, and they're going to use their giant evil ship and super weapon to exact revenge,
which takes half the movie to deploy. They finally are going to shoot their stupid weapon, and it takes literally 15 minutes to
That's why I was linking it up with the Abrams verse, because there was a Romulan with a giant weapon.
Absolutely.
So Jake Repsap says Nemesis is a good movie. It has its issues. The Troy stuff is awful, but overall it's good.
I mean, I don't hate Nemesis or anything like that. I don't think it really comes together. And I wish that for the Romulans debut in the movies as a major, I mean, there had been Romulans in movies, but they were never the focus. But it wasn't the Romulans; it was the Remans.
They were in Generations, sort of.
There were a few dead Romulans in Generations on the outpost.
You can tell I watched that recently.
Star Trek 5 had a Romulan, Star Trek 6 had a Romulan, but
Right.
as far as being a major force in the film,
Right.
I wish it had been more about Romulans and Romulan culture. Now, I do love that opening sequence with the Senate.
Yes.
The Senate, we get to see the Senate, the Romulan Senate, and they get attacked by was it Theleron radiation? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah. Who knows? That does sound right, though. But
yeah.
Is that the thing with the box? They put the box in there, and the box opened up and killed everyone.
Yes. Yeah, everybody dies from
hey,
it. Yeah.
Look, I remember more stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think that the dune buggy really fit into what Star Trek had been to that point. It was
almost like it's like trying to insert action.
Yeah.
Like the action didn't make sense in the story.
Sure.
It's just we have to have an action sequence, so let's do this.
We have to have an action sequence for the trailer.
Well, yeah.
Well, okay. But like we were saying, the action made sense in First Contact.
Yeah.
You know, it absolutely worked. And this just seemed so like tacked on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you compare the dune buggy sequence to, say, the battle on the outside of the Enterprise hull. You know what I mean? And they're both much bigger than the series would have done. And they're both big movie set pieces. But I think the First Contact sequence just worked so much better.
Absolutely.
And there's not really emotional stakes in the dune buggy sequence, because who are these guys on dune buggy planet? You know.
Dune buggy planet.
Yeah.
I want to go there.
So let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Charles. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'd cut you off. You go ahead.
Looking back, if we look at the movies, when we look at Generations, this is a passing of the torch, and it's Picard continuing what had happened at the end of All Good Things, which is finding new depths to himself, finding new actual joy in his life for the adventure. That was that was Generations. And then with First Contact, this is a man who has to face his demons and again face his weakness and the fact that he was broken and emerged from that. Unlike all the other captains we all saw in the series who went nuts, he emerged a stronger person facing what had happened to him. And then with Nemesis, I guess you can say that was all about him strengthening and saving the entity for which he'd been a part, which is Starfleet and the Federation, and making sure that it's something worthwhile. And I think all those things, you can kind of get our messages about what Picard was. Yep. What was the point of Picard in I said Nemesis, I missed Insurrection. What was the message, I guess? What was Picard teaching us in Nemesis? What did he learn about himself, or what did we learn through the Picard? Because for the others, I can find things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say the nature versus nurture that they're trying to do. I have a hard time believing that even Picard would have turned out Shinzon if he had grown up on Riemann. You know what I mean? On Remus, I should say.
Right.
But I think that's a lot of what they were going for was, who am I based on? Who would I be this person if I was in this situation? You know what I mean? But also, I mean, Shinzon in a way can be thought of as like a surrogate son that he finds. You know what I mean? Because you have the theme with Picard of not sort of the kids in Picard goes all the way back to Encounter at Farpoint. You know, when he doesn't like kids, and then you find later in Generations he regrets not having children of his own in a family.
Right.
And then he finds this clone of himself who, I mean, could be a son to him. But I don't know that they really lean into that, and I don't know that I don't know. I don't think that lands for me, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree, and I think a lot of this. I think the sort of the pivot point. I've used that word too many times tonight. Was Inner Light, you know, where he lives that whole other person's life and has a family. I think that's the thing that really sort of changed his perspective on who he is and who his career, what his career is, and what he's sort of left behind, what he's missed out on. It may not be a conscious thing after that experience, but I think that over time, that's the thing that really brings him into what we see in the movies.
Yeah, and I wish that episode happened at a time in television where they could have just talked about it more, you know, and that could have been a big change in Picard's character. Like we saw that just recently on Prodigy, where they did a time thing, and Rock Talk was changed as a character because of it going forward, you know. But exactly. I mean, Picard references the Inner Light a few times on the show, but yeah, I mean, I would have liked for Generations to land better. It just felt to me like it was
Insurrection.
Oh,
Nemesis.
First Nemesis. You know what? Whichever one.
Whichever one.
Whatever.
Absolutely.
I love that.
It's
Third base.
It's a toss of a coin, let me tell you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it just, for me, that episode, that movie's it's not terrible. I'll watch it.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think a lot of the first season of Picard improves Nemesis for me by including things like blue skies, by, really giving them another chance at that Data, saying goodbye to Data.
Yep.
And I love seeing the legacy of, Data is this, it could be essentially an immortal character with so much to offer the universe, so smart, with so many things he could do and so much he could learn. And he gives it up for Picard, who at that point, I mean, he's in the 24th century, but he's still an old man. You know what I mean? That he had lived his life, basically. And then Data gave his life for him. And then he, in first season of Picard, is dealing with his feelings about that still. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, the first season of Picard makes Nemesis a lot more watchable, because that's not the end of Picard and Data characters anymore.
That makes sense.
Many years it was.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
that's a really good point. And it's just like we were talking about with Insurrection, where fitting into the overall spectrum, it makes sense.
Yeah,
and I think Nemesis makes sense, just like you were saying. And I had not thought of that before, and that's really smart.
J. Crabsap agrees.
Hey, thanks everybody.
Cool.
Yeah.
The end.
I think one feeling I have about Nemesis is, if you think about it now, I don't know how big the name was, and I don't know how big it is now, but the fact that you had somebody like Tom Hardy in the movie is kind of phenomenal, because he's known as disappearing into his characters, for good and bad. I mean, I've been reading some stuff about Mad Max Fury Road, which is very interesting. But he disappears to his characters and he gives it. And one thing I can say is, even though I don't necessarily love the movie Nemesis, is there are really great performances in it.
Yeah.
So Stewart gives fantastic performances, and Tom Hardy gives a fantastic performance for what he's being asked to do.
That's true. Yeah.
Marina Sirtis, in a role again that I have issues with, does fantastic work.
But she's actually given some material to work with. She's given a challenging thing to do, which you don't get in any. I mean, other than playing drunk, you don't get that in any of the other TNG films.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so
and
there are great performances in that movie.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So Galaxy Star Queen 77 that says that part of Picard saying goodbye to Data killed me, and as in my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
Yeah. Totally.
I was bawling.
Yeah, it struck me watching the first season of Picard, because guys, I didn't mean to do this, but as we're going on, just talking about how old I was at different points when these movies came out. But I mean,
well, that's cool.
The first season of Next Gen, I was 6 years old. By Nemesis, I was 21. And when Picard came out, I was 39. So I mean, it's like my entire lifetime. It's just amazing that those guys played those characters over that stretch of time, and the material, they're still so good. They're still,
that's so cool.
Yeah,
that is. I like your journey, because for me, you have to go back to Gary Mitchell and start talking about my childhood and when I first saw it, because I was, as they say, good and grown when the movies came out, so I don't have anything to compare to that.
Me too. And as we've talked about before, I never really connected with TOS when it was happening, because I was a Lost in Space kid, and but it wasn't until later on in repeats, in the afternoons, I'd come home from school and there would be Star Trek, and I started to get into it. It wasn't until Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
Friends took me to see Wrath of Khan. I didn't really have any big interest in seeing it. But I was 100% hooked by the end of that movie. And I was like, I'm now a Trekker. So it was like a light switch. And after that, digging back into the original series the way I did, and then being so excited about Next Gen launching, and then seeing the way that Picard has grown and changed and evolved over this many decades is so amazing.
Yeah. It's incredible that in a couple of days that it's going to keep going. The new.
Yeah, I know.
I still can't believe the new episode with Captain Picard is going to be. I know he's an admiral now, but he's always Captain Picard to me.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
2 days from now. Oh, so excited.
I know.
So Spotted Giraffe says that the storyline and Gave Troy Nemesis sucks, and I just want to note, because everyone keeps saying this, I have no memory of this. So apparently I wiped it from my brain. So
it was another mental assault.
Yeah.
Where someone uses telepathic powers to invade Troy's mind, which was a recurring thing that would happen to her on the show.
Yes.
which
mind and
yeah,
body.
yes, yeah, and yeah, I like Troy when she's not being mind assaulted and she's doing her job and having good character moments. You know what I mean?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's another way they could have done that. But I do think when y'all talking about Star Trek Picard, again, if you stand back and look at the arc of that character across what is decades now, then Star Trek Picard does serve as a good next step from the movies. If you look at his journeys through those movies, because he has absolutely changed as a character from the series to the movies and to this. And I think that's a great journey.
And it was a great pull in Picard of that opening sequence with the song Blue Skies, which was tied into Data's death. I mean, that, and plus they used the Bing Crosby version, and he's Denise Crosby's grandfather. So it all ties in so well. And so I like Nemesis more now that it's a step along those journeys and not the end. You know?
Exactly.
Spotted Giraffe also said that Picard saves Troy's story as well a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think the best material Marina Sirtis had as Troy is in Picard. I think she was fantastic in the.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
I agree with that too. I think that I wonder how many of the movies, the 4 movies that we had, were written with Patrick Stewart in mind. Like, would they have done that slightly differently if Shatner had still been the captain? Or
100%.
Yeah,
well, 100%.
Yeah, and he had a lot of input into the.
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Because
those movies would have been very different had they been TOS movies.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that because it works. I mean, and one thing I can say about those, unlike the original series movies, I don't dislike any of the TNG movies. Insurrection is my least favorite, but that's not that doesn't mean I don't dislike it. If you said watch it, I have no problem. And I do think a large part is Patrick Stewart because he does anchor all those movies. And which he should.
Totally agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's to their detriment. I think that because the nature of the kind of movies they are, they felt like they had to go to the Picard data show, and
exactly.
a lot of the other, I mean, you can do that in the original series was Kirk and Spock from the start. So when you turn it into films, it makes sense. You have Kirk and Spock as the stars, but and you were talking about earlier how on the show you'd have a Picard episode, a Troy episode, a Beverly episode,
right?
And I would love it if there had been a Picard movie, a Data movie, a Troy movie. You know what I mean? Like, I know that's never going to happen, but I would have.
Oh, me too, 100%.
Okay. Well,
that's about it.
Yeah. So if people want to see more of us, our show is called Earth Station Trek. We're on the ESO network. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on any podcasting platform. We're all over the place. Join our Facebook group. We do polls and we have discussions and we have a lot of fun over there. And Alan, where can people find more of you on the internet?
Well, I have another podcast, which is called Modern Musicology, and you can find it on Podbean and Spotify and iTunes and all those other nifty places where you find podcasts. And I have a publishing company called Cosmic Press, and that is spelled KOZMIC because I'm an idiot. Press. And you can find it at .com. You can find it Facebook, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. Check it out.
And how about you, Keith?
You can find me on the standard locations such as Instagram, now Twitter, and on Facebook, primarily the ESO Network Facebook groups. And I was fortunate enough to have done this long enough ago where my name is actually Keith Johnson.
Wow.
Not like Keith Johnson 1 2 3 4 5 or something.
Oh, I was like, I don't know what he means by that.
He was Twitter user number 3. He just hasn't learned to use it yet. And how about us, Veronica?
Feltnerdy.com.
Yep. Veronica and I are puppeteers. We've been doing that for 9 years now. We do a lot of shows for conventions and local events and things like that. A lot of nerdy sort of puppet shows, Star Trek, Doctor Who, that sort of thing. You can find us at feltnerdy.com, which will redirect you to our Facebook page. So you can also cut out the middleman and just go to see us on Facebook. And if you happen to be in the Atlanta area, we're performing an adult show at the Sinful Sundays Variety Show at the Red Light Cafe, Sunday, March the 6th at 8 p.m. So check it out.
And J Carb Sap says, have a good night. Smiley face, Spock.
Thank you everybody
Thank you so much for joining and
commenting.
commenting.
LLEP.